Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics Ukraine War Update extra video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. This is a video designed to give you some extra nuggets and juicy tidbits to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding and appreciation for the Ukraine war at the moment. Where should we start? Well, I'm going to start with a very lucky Ukrainian soldier. He is certainly one lucky guy. Here he is.
Покажись, братанчик. Це вхід, їбать, це виход, нахуй.
Ouch.
І, блядь, візьми. І нахуй, сука. Єбать, блядь. Да. Покажись, братанчик. Це вхід, їбать, це виход, нахуй.
And there you go. That is a guy who had a very close scrape with a bullet. I'd say the helmet did his job, but actually, the bullet's gone through the helmet and missed his head. So if he wasn't wearing a helmet, it would have just scraped his head as well. So there you go. But still, a lucky guy. Now, this is interesting because I've come across this in a number of places. Lots of people reporting on this, but I thought it'd be interesting to report Rebar doing so. Which is, they say that at the various meetings, the same actors are playing different people. The thing is, they really are the same people, except for the officer in today's story. So I'm not really quite sure what they're trying to say here. But here, and this happened the other day, where he was making his speech in front of a bunch of supposed army members, but some of them, most of them almost certainly are. But the ones often very close to him are people that are in virtually every photo that he does. In this case, this particular woman. There are other times when one of the most recent famous ones was when he spoke to, or supposedly spoke to, the mothers of a unit of people who had been sort of wiped out, and he eventually agreed to speak to the mothers at the table. And it turns out that something like 3 out of the 5 people around the table were plants like this. And you're thinking, yeah, you didn't really actually speak to the mothers, did you? It was all a completely staged thing. Well, it's nothing he's not used to. And here's another example of that. And here's this particular woman who seems to do the rounds with him. Okay, moving on to Gazprom. We've had the worst year this century, or in the last 22 years. Gazprom's exports to key foreign markets have nearly halved this year. They're trying to claw that back by doing more exports to China, but it's not that easy. So let's talk about that a little bit. Russian gas exports outside the ex-Soviet states has fallen by 46%. Gazprom head Alexei Miller said the company had been steadily increasing supplies to China during the year, but did not give details on the quantities. From January the 1st, he said, "We are on a fundamentally new level of gas supplies to China," Miller said in a statement. Well, China will be taking more on, but the problem is, in order to do an awful lot of extra export, you need the logistics in place, which requires really lengthy pipelines, because the other option is turning it into liquefied gas and exporting it that way. It's just not so easy. Whereas oil, again, you do need pipelines if you're going to do it in mass quantities, but you can also put it in barrels and ship it much more easily than you can gas. So in the short term, it would be easier for Russia to up their exports of oil to other countries in order to fill the gap that they are losing in exports to countries they've been traditionally exporting to. But gas is just a different kettle of fish. At a conference last week, Miller admitted Gazprom had a very, very difficult year. Miller noted a total change in the energy markets driven by sanctions in response to Putin's decision to send troops into Ukraine. Gazprom accounts for 11% of the global natural gas production and has the largest gas reserves in the world. That's according to the Moscow Times. Here is a thread that, just a very short thread. Some of it's quite useful and interesting. Other bits, fairly obvious. But here's a thread on fighting in urban warfare and things to consider, challenges and necessities. So even the fighting for this small Ukrainian town highlights some of the phases, challenges, and necessities of urban warfare. One, use of assets for aerial surveillance of the urban area. So drones are so important well, we've seen them being so important in the entire conflict, but particularly in urban warfare, when you're trying to get an idea of the surroundings. The use of mortars in support. So mortars have a much smaller range than artillery, but they're very much more mobile, so you can move them around with you. And because of their smaller range, actually, you can have them in your teams and then hit somewhere in the urban environment, as long as you get that sort of uh, as long as buildings don't get in the way, and you've got to consider those high-rise buildings and other obstacles to your kind of line of sight, if you like. But they are just really useful for doing 2 to 3 kilometer hits or whatever 1 kilometer hits. So mortars are really important. The necessity number three, the necessity to hide armored fighting vehicles, AFVs. So that's tanks, IFVs, APCs, all that kind of stuff, SPGs. While in the urban defense, the Russians failed to do that here, and they paid a price. Four, the use of indirect fires in support. Five, breaking in. So indirect fire is stuff like artillery, for example, and mortars, where you can't see the thing you're shooting at. So a rifle or a machine gun is direct fire. You're literally, I'm shooting at you. I can see you. It's a straight line from me to you. Whereas if I can't see you, and you got this trajectory of ordnance that is more indirect, that is indirect fire. So the use of indirect fire is important in supporting urban uh, your troops in an urban environment. Breaking in and gaining lodgement can be chaotic. I mean, the whole thing is pretty chaotic, I would have thought. High ammunition expenditure. This is the same for troops, actually. So they talk about, maybe in the open fields needing a 3-to-1 advantage when attacking. Urban warfare, 5-to-1, 7-to-1, 9-to-1 advantage of, offensive troops to defensive troops. You really have to overwhelm the opposition. So yeah, but that's the same with ammunition as well, which is really high ammunition expenditure. When dismounts are moving, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. This is a little saying that you hear quite a lot in warfare. Don't rush around crazily. If you do things slowly, it's smooth, and if it's smooth, it ends up being fast or optimally fast. So it's a bit oxymoronic this, but the idea is that, calm down, do it slowly, do it well, and it'll go smoothly. And if it's smooth, it will be the fastest you can be. Good to see that Ukrainians are using AFVs in support, he says. So they were in the early Mariupol defense. You saw some excellent use of autocannons, 30 millimeter autocannons and I showed you some videos of that sort of a few months ago now, attacking other mechanized bits of equipment, taking out some tanks. The Ukrainians really used their IFVs, their infantry fighting vehicles, very well in Mariupol. And this guy seems to think they're doing them well elsewhere as well. The necessity of training for close quarter combat. This is why Ukraine has happily sent 10,000 or several cohorts, I think now, of 10,000 troops for training in the UK and other places as well, and training by lots of nations, not just when they're sent to the UK, it's not just British people training them. You get Swedish, Australian, Kiwi, Canadian, whatever. And a large component of that is urban warfare training. So that is really important. Whereas the mobilized troops that are being sent into these same places often, like all the convicts being sent into Bakhmut, um, don't have that training, or if they do, it's like just a few hours, and it's just pretty terrible training we're hearing about the mobilized troops. So there's a real difference there, real asymmetry. Collateral damage outside and inside a building, which makes it challenging to approach and clear. Just buildings are dangerous, right? You hit them, there's falling debris, but you can booby trap them. Being inside can be dangerous as well as being outside. They just it's a very different kettle of fish than running around in a field or hiding in some woods or whatever. It has its own hazards for sure. 11, the small urban areas have subterranean, even small urban areas have subterranean parts. So this is the idea that even a small house out in the middle of a farm complex might have cellars, which you need to consider. Um, and as we'll find out with Makiivka, don't sleep on top of basements full of massive amounts of ammunition. That's not a good idea. So yeah, you need to consider subterranean parts in with buildings in urban warfare. The challenges of communicating in combat. Obviously, you need good radio communication. Whether there's interference from buildings, I don't know. That'd be interesting to find out. But yeah, communicating is always a challenge in combat and something you need to consider. Apparently, very much so in the urban environment. Be careful with the use of tracer rounds. The enemy will see where you are firing. Obviously, that's true in general, no matter where you're doing it, but evidently, particularly so in the urban environments. And finally, be prepared for enemy counter artillery fire because now they know you're in a town. Seek shelter soonest. Finally, the need for all fighters to train for casualty triage and challenging urban casualty evacuation. There are some people saying that Russians have really suffered in terms of the golden hour, needing to get really decent medical assistance after getting injured. That first hour is really important. Well, the Russians, I think, are suffering in that respect, and we are seeing higher death rates in their casualty numbers, apparently, than the Ukrainians are receiving. Um, so yeah, this person replied, "The essentials of war. Tracer rounds go both ways. Friendly fire isn't. If your plan goes unexpectedly well, it's a trap. If you can see the enemy can see you. So those are always things to bear in mind. Anyway, I just thought, there's some discussion points there, most probably. Right, we're going to go on to the HIMARS attack in Makiivka that I reported earlier in my frontline update. This is interesting. I can't remember who it was in my comments. It was maybe Cheryl, maybe Jackie, maybe someone else. I don't know. Uh, that was saying that when I showed the MiG fighter with the Santa hat, saying there's something that doesn't quite sit well when you are kind of jovially sitting there with a maybe you're not jovially sitting there, but you've got your Santa hat and beard on, and then you're releasing a couple of missiles that are going to kill people. There's a kind of, and I was like, do you know what? That's a good point. I showed you that because I thought, oh, this is interesting. This is a bit quirky and different. And the same with this actually, and this is going to lead on to where some of these HIMARS. I mean, who knows? These might be in the same HIMARS rockets. I think this is a little bit before, but this is from a few nights ago. But you can imagine this might have been the same truck used to attack Makiivka and kill upwards of 400 people all at once. Here, here is that, and you can imagine the quirky music there. But here is a HIMARS rocket launcher, or maybe some other GMLRS, some other GMLRS guided multiple launch rocket system firing off at some Russian targets, and obviously they've spruced it up nicely so it looks in the Christmas spirit. And this guy's wearing a Santa hat, but the reality is those rockets are going to be flying off and killing people. That's their intention, taking out equipment, but either taking out people as an intended target or as collateral damage that you don't mind at all about. So there is there is a good point and well made by that commenter. So thank you for that. And let's move on to Makiivka. Let's see what the mainstream media says about it here. The Guardian, could be anywhere though. So the Russia's defense ministry, in a rare admission on Monday, said 63 Russian soldiers died when Ukraine hit a temporary deployment facility with 4 US supplied HIMARS missiles. So there's varying accounts of how many missiles hit, whether some were shot down. The Russians make sort of certain claims. This is interesting because the TASS news agency initially said 15 people injured. Then obviously there was so much information on social media and there was such an outcry about this. And the claims were as well that there were so many bodies being piled onto trucks that the bodies were falling off the trucks and just being left there. There's a few images you can see of bodies just left nearby on the roadside. I don't have any video evidence of that claim, but the claims from locals are quite, there are quite a number of those claims. So it seems like there were just that many dead bodies that the Russian and those claims are being thrown out by pro-Russian sources as well, including Igor Girkin, Igor Strelkov, that the Russian officials, spokespeople, defense ministry here had to say something. So if they've omitted 63, and this is interesting because they're not very, they don't admit these things very often, right? So that they have said 63, you can bet your bottom dollar it's going to be a lot more than that. Uh, the article continues here. Without claiming the strike, the Ukraine's military command said up to 400 Russian soldiers were killed in the city, which is in a Moscow-controlled area of the Donetsk region. So it's just sort of next to Donetsk city. It's another part of the city, essentially. The attack also sparked renewed criticism among pro-invasion bloggers and some officials over the state of Russian military and the decision to use civilian infrastructure to house soldiers. Well, this is interesting. They're getting all uppity about this because the Russians have been doing this for a long time. The quote is, and it's a direct quote from someone, from Audrey Medvedev, who's an ultra-conservative journalist and deputy chairman of Moscow City Parliament, said, housing personnel in buildings instead of housing them in shelters directly aids the enemy. From the situation in Makiivka, it is necessary to draw the toughest conclusion. So this guy's not saying it's bad that we're housing them in a school. It's just like, yeah, wasn't good for us because we're housing them all together, and it helps the enemy. But there are some people saying, what are we doing housing them in schools or maybe hospital? Well, that's what they've been doing for a long time because they hope that the enemy won't strike them there. And there is a definite rationale there that's sensible in that regard. But then one theory is that, well, this explains why Russia keep hitting hospitals and schools and so on and so forth, because they're expecting Ukraine to be sheltering troops in those kind of facilities, and they might do. I'm not going to make comment about that, but it could be a form of projection going on there. So Russia's acknowledgement of scores of deaths in one incident was almost without precedent. Moscow rarely releases figures for its casualties, and when it does, the figures are typically low. It acknowledged just one death from among a crew of hundreds when Ukraine sank its flagship cruiser Moskva in April. I mean, I think the best sort of figures are 400 to 450 maybe of those uh, on the Moskva, who supposedly drowned, and they said one, so there you go. Sunday's deadly strike came a day after Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov said the Kremlin was planning to close its borders and announce a second wave of mass mobilization early January. The Kremlin earlier denied there were plans to launch a fresh recruitment drive. This has been the rumor. It's been going for some time now. Expect a whole load of mobilization drives in the new year. So Rob Lee talks about this. He said one of the problems with relying on mobilized soldiers is that it is more difficult to disperse them because of a lack of small unit leadership. So they don't have these small groups of well-led units or whatever, small units, groups of soldiers. There just seem to be one amorphous mass of people under, one leader will cover, who knows, 100 troops or whatever, rather than one for 15, or you get my point here. And so they require to be housed together, billeted together, and this could lead towards a situation like we've seen in Makiivka. But housing them next to ammunition storage, says Rob Lee, is simply a leadership failure. And he goes on to, I read most of this to you earlier. This is from Igor Gherkin and Igor Strelkov, but I didn't read you this last bit here, which is him admitting that something bad happened and that hundreds, of people dead. I was warned that this could happen again at any time, since this is not the only such extremely dense deployment of personnel and equipment in the zone of destruction of HIMARS missiles. And yes, this is not the first such case. Last year, there were also quite a few of them, although as a rule, still with fewer victims. But our generals are untrainable in principle, although they themselves, after the summer pogroms of caches, preferred to stay away from the location of entrusted troops outside the radius of destruction of enemy missiles. That's interesting. So he's really critical of Russian military command, but also saying that, those in the top echelons of command do like to stay away from everyone else to save their own bacon if they get hit. Rebar says, and again, being a bit more, open about this than sources were earlier on, straight after the event took place. Our sources say about 600 people were in the building, about 70 confirmed dead. Rubble is still being cleared. Estimated losses are as high as 110 people. 100 plus were wounded, so that's 110 people dead. 100 plus were wounded, 136 according to internal reports. So that's Rebar's source. The Rebar's claim there. We've got the Ministry of Defense saying sort of 63 dead, and Ukrainians claiming 400. Truth is probably somewhere in the middle. It's a bad event for the Russians, no matter what. And then this is a fascinating opinion from one Russian saying, and Ukrainian says here, Russian channels say 600 orcs are killed in Makiivka is nothing. They have 25 million reservists. So this is Svetlana Ismagilova, who knows who she is. Guys, seriously, what is 600 people for Russia? There is no loss in war. We have a mobilization reserve of 25 million. It's like, okay, goodness me. Do you want to go to the front line? Do you want to be one of those people? Go and do it. Put your money where your mouth is. Yeah, we've got 25 million. Right, get on the front line then. It's easy to say you've got that many million when you don't think you're going to be called up for mobilization. How easy it is for you to say that. Outrageous. So anyway, that's I am. Oh, actually, no. I'll leave that till the last thing. So this is the last thing I'm going to say, or the last nugget, if you like, for today. And this is a bit of footage that was pretty well, it's devastating for the trench. This is Ukrainian forces from the Omega Special Forces anti-terrorism detachment targeting a Russian position with an explosive-equipped FPV racing drone. FPV means first-person, so vision, so first-person point of view, and a racing drone as well. So this is a quadcopter that has been equipped with a pretty big explosive. Indeed, the explosive looks to be a PG-7VL. So this is an anti-tank rocket where they've just taken the explosive warhead off and strapped it to the racing drone. And apparently that was the racing drone. And they've sent that into a trench. So this is the footage here. And as you'd expect, from another angle, Bosch. Pretty quick drone there. It's a racing drone, so you'd expect that, but it's fairly well loaded and quite an impact. That's a high explosive anti-tank warhead. So that will do some considerable damage to the people inside if there were indeed anyone. If there was anyone there. Now, as you can see there, FPV, heat, lots of what I've said, IFVs, AFVs, APCs. I am going to do a separate video, just a one-off. I'll probably do it tomorrow at some point, and it's going to be working through a slideshow of acronyms. So one of my members, who's a member of the channel, I put out to my members only last night or yesterday at some point. What do you want me to talk about? Give me a subject for the video, and I'll see if I can do that. And one of the easy, just I can tick that off, is acronyms. And I did this some time ago. Talked about acronyms, or in the context of actually talking about different vehicles and what they were. But I'm going to just go through a load of acronyms that are being used regularly in this war. So here's just a typical tweet. At least 3 Russian BMP infantry fighting vehicles were destroyed by the Ukrainian Omega unit using Stugna P and FGM 148 Javelin ATGMs near Avdiivka of Donetsk Oblast. Footage shows that the work of FPV drones armed with heat munitions. 4 BMP were damaged. Just unless you know your acronyms, that's like, what is that? It's word salad. So I'm just going to do that. Hopefully that'll be useful for you. And I might add to it and sort of reproduce that video as I come across more acronyms and sort of add to it. So it's just an ongoing resource that you can refer back to, or I can refer you to. Anyway, yeah, look out for that coming. In the meantime, thank you. There's a few nuggets. Hopefully that's enough to sate your insatiable appetite. of course, if it's insatiable, nothing will sate it. So I'm just talking nonsense, obviously. Anyway, thank you very much for your support. Please like, subscribe, and share. And I will speak to you tomorrow. Thank you.